Good morning. It's Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. It is Tuesday at about 10:25. Another beautiful day here in Midcoast, Maine. It's officially spring slash summertime. It's been pretty nice, consistent weather. So hope everyone's doing good. So yeah, I've been trying to pump out videos. The last month or so, I've been focusing on lots of movies that I've been buying. I've been kind of going a little bit crazy as far as new purchases, so it's been awesome. There's still a couple of new movies that I need to watch, and then I'll do some shows on. So very excited about that. But in the meantime, I've been kind of going back and forth. The last week or so, I've been kind of going back and forth with doing some shows on movies that I really love, but I feel like they're not really talked about enough. I just uploaded a new video on a Darren Aronofsky movie called The Fountain, which is a really depressing movie, but it's an incredible movie. It's one of the most powerful movies I think I've ever seen, but I never hear it talked about. So I just did a show on that. I just uploaded the video this morning, so check that out if you get a chance. I want to welcome aboard some of the new subscribers. Been getting the last few weeks, been getting some new subscribers, and trying to always keep the channel consistent with new content. I was doing last month. I did quite a few like interview shows, so that's something at some point I want to get back into doing when those opportunities present themselves. But again, I never. That's one thing with this channel is, in the way kind of my brain works, is I never really run out of movies to talk about. There's always movies, even if I get through a big haul of movies that I had that I've purchased recently and I watch them and then I do all the shows on them. There's still movies always in the back burner that I want to talk about, or movies that really always have always affected me, and continue to have an impact on me. So today's show is on one of those movies. It's definitely one of the most iconic movies I think ever made. It's one of those movies that I actually, when I first saw it, I don't know, I had such a sense of dread when I first saw it that I almost couldn't get through it, and and that was quite a few years ago, maybe about 13 years ago or so was when I first saw this movie, and that is the iconic Eraserhead from 1977. This was when I first saw this movie. It really kind of rattled my cage. It was kind of like there was this sense when I first saw Eraserhead, of course, directed by the iconic David Lynch, one of the greatest directors ever, one of my favorite all-time directors. But I remember when I first saw Eraserhead, and it was one of his movies that, again, I'm always blown away that this came out in '77. Like, I always forget how old this film is. And by the time I was kind of late to the game, late to the table, as far as finally getting a chance to see this movie. And I remember when I first saw it, it really got under my skin. I almost couldn't get through it because there was like a sense of, I don't know, like almost this overwhelming sense of being claustrophobic. Everything felt like the rooms. I remember when I watched it, it felt like the room was getting smaller and it was like getting harder and harder to breathe. And it was just really unsettling and unnerving, and very like the pacing of this film too. It's kind of relentless, but it's got this slow burn narrative around it. So, and it's more of a film where it's one of those. I actually haven't watched it in a few years, but it's one of those films where there actually isn't very little dialogue. I think compared to a lot of other Lynch's work, there isn't. It's got even more of a, I don't know, almost avant-garde aesthetic to it, or surrealistic quality. And that's, that's saying a lot when it comes to the world of David Lynch. His world is all about kind of the darkness and the beauty and the surrealism of what, kind of what existence is. And it's that juxtaposition, light and darkness kind of being intertwined. And that's the thing I've always loved about David Lynch. The first movie of his that I think I ever saw was Wild at Heart with Nicolas Cage and Laura Dern. That was the first Lynch movie I ever saw. And I was hooked. I was just blown away by that movie. I'd never seen anything like it. And since then, I pretty much own all of David Lynch's films. He's gone on to become one of my biggest influences. Angelo Badalamenti, who is the composer for he was the composer for all of his films. He unfortunately passed away a few years back. One of my personal heroes, one of my favorite, probably my favorite composer, especially when it comes to films, and probably just in general as a composer. But since, when I first saw Wild at Heart, that was my introduction to the world of David Lynch. And since then, I own pretty much all of his films. My favorite film of his is probably Blue Velvet. That is my go-to movie. And around the time that I first saw Blue Velvet was when I saw Eraserhead. And, this movie is, I don't know, I almost don't think of this movie as being a movie per se. It's an experience. It's like you're part of this ritual. And it's such a beautifully shot movie. And again, it does have never this unending sense of dread and claustrophobia, and or yeah, where you feel like you're stuck in this room and that you can't really get out, and the walls are closing in. So you just the you I you almost get this sense when I first saw this movie, and even now I've seen this movie quite a few times. Like you're getting pushed in the chest, and you're almost becoming overwhelmed with like the sense of claustrophobia. It's such an intense experience, and I almost think that this movie is not even really a movie. It's like more of just like this visceral, kind of primal experience. Of course, it's all shot in black and white. The way the use the sound of this film is so haunting. All of the sounds of kind of these machines in the background is just really unrelenting. And there really isn't like, you know, even say compared to say Wild at Heart, where there is a little bit more of a traditional structure as far as the narrative. Eraserhead really, it has that, but it's not. It's so ambiguous. You know, and of course, this movie has an amazing cast: Jack Nance, Charlotte Stalwart, Jack Fisk, Laura Neer, Judith Anna Roberts, Toby Keeler, Jennifer Lynch. And, you know, this was the first David Lynch movie. And I don't own this movie on Blu-ray, which is kind of you know, kind of disappointing. I'm surprised I don't own this on Blu-ray. I own most of his other films. You know, in particular, I was talking about my first experience with Lynch was Wild at Heart. I have a really beautiful collection of that on Blu-ray, and Blue Velvet. It's so many great films. Twin Peaks, of course, and so I have quite a few of his films on Blu-ray, but I don't have Eraserhead for some reason. But this DVD edition is pretty spectacular. I got this. I can't remember when I bought this. I've had this edition for a very long time. I got it at I think it was when, probably about 10 or 12 years ago, when obviously a lot of video shops started closing. And I believe I got it in, one of those times. At one point there was, well, Opera's Video, which is the local video shop, which is still around and still doing it, which is hard to believe. They have always been in existence and continue to be in existence. But at that time, there was also Harbor Auto Video, which was in Camden, and then also Movie Gallery, which was another place in Belfast. And I think there was one other shop. And I think it was during the time Movie Gallery closed first, and then Harbor Auto Video closed. But Opera House Video kept it going, and I think that's where I bought. I think I bought this at Movie Gallery actually. But it's a beautiful edition. There's all kinds of really strange and interesting special features. It almost, a lot of the times with special features, and part of the allure of having a really good special features like documentaries on DVDs or Blu-rays. For me, as a fan, a movie fan, a lot of most of the time, the allure of that is that you kind of find out maybe some questions you had about the film or what the process was like, or maybe it answers even some questions. With the special features on here, it almost leaves you. It's even almost, I don't know, almost more ambiguous. It almost leaves you with more questions. It's very mysterious, very strange, just about as strange as the film. But again, it's one of his greatest films, easily. I think I put it up there with like classic American films like Citizen Kane or Touch of Evil. I think it's that iconic, and as bizarre and as strange and as surrealistic as this film is, I really feel like when you look at kind of the fabric of our culture as Americans, from the perspective of the cinema, movies that I feel should be put in a time capsule, and that should be preserved, and anyone who is a fan of cinema should see. I think Eraserhead is one of those movies. I think it's an iconic movie. It's a very important movie. Again, it can be really hard, especially when you first see it. It's probably not for everyone. I think his other films have a little bit more. Well, it's using the word commerciality, or using the word commercial appeal for a David Lynch film is kind of I don't know, kind of an oxymoron. But I feel like in terms of Eraserhead, say, in comparison to, say, Blue Velvet or the Twin Peaks series, which are very surrealistic and very dark movies, I feel that those films have a little bit more of an appeal because they have a little bit more of a traditional uh, way of telling the story as compared to Eraserhead, which is way more, I think, avant-garde and outside of any kind of tradition. But I think it was the birth of David Lynch's amazing career. It really was a risk. It really put him on the map as a director. And to think that a director came out of the gates with a movie like Eraserhead and went on to become kind of a household name is kind of jaw dropping into itself. Like that is a feat like no other, really, when you think about what this film is like and the experience around it. And like I said, I feel like David Lynch is one of those directors that goes, for me personally, goes beyond just being a fan of his films or his visions. He's kind of a personal hero for me, and I feel like his whole world that he's created over these many years, and his legacy greatly influenced me in many ways, especially when it comes to you know the weird music that I create. So and this, especially Angelo Badalamenti, his composer. So yeah, amazing film. Again, I'm always blown away, and I always forget that this came out in '77. Like it's wild. I have to watch this again. But what a it's a masterpiece, and one of the I think it's an essential movie. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.